and servicemen to risk their lives, and 4 were killed in the last 2 days in Vietnam, and asking union members to hold down their wage requests at a time when restraint and sacrifice are being asked of every citizen, the American people will find it hard, as I do, to accept a situation in which a tiny handful of steel executives whose pursuit of private power and profit exceeds their sense of public responsibility can show such utter contempt for the interests of 185 million Americans. A few gigantic corporations have decided to increase prices in ruthless disregard of their public responsibilities. Some time ago, I asked each American to consider what he would do for his country, and I asked the steel companies. In the last 24 hours, we had their answer.
Mr. President, your brother Ted recently on television said that after seeing the cares of office on you, that he wasn't sure he'd ever be interested in being the president. I wonder if you could tell us whether, if you had it to do over again, you would work for the presidency, and whether you can recommend the job to others.
Well, the answer is, the first is yes, and the second is no. I don't recommend it to others. At least for a while.
President, Mr. President, the critics of your medical care plan have charged that this will be the opening wedge for socialized medicine in this country. Would you care to comment on that, sir?
Well, it's an old argument when a case is lost to argue that it's all right here, but what's it going to mean for the future? Under that argument, there wouldn't have been any progress on any social legislation in this country. That was the argument that was used against the Social Security Act in the 30s. It's the argument used against the minimum wage. It's the argument used against any agricultural program. It is the oldest argument in the world. And it was the kind of argument which was successfully defeated on many occasions during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah.
Mr. President, you have said, and I think more than once, that heads of government should not go to the summit to negotiate agreements, but only to approve agreements negotiated at a lower level. Now it's being said and written that you're going to eat those words and go to a summit without any agreement at a lower level. Has your position changed, sir?
Well, I'm going to have a dinner for all the people who've written it, and we'll see who eats what.
Two well-known security risks have recently been put on a task force in the State Department to help reorganize the Office of Security.
Well, now who?
William Arthur Weiland, a well-known man who for over a year...
The thing, Miss McClendon, I think that... would you give me the other name?
Yes, sir. J. Clayton Miller.
Right. Well, now, I don't... I think the term... I would say that the term you've used to describe them is a very strong term, which I would think that you should be prepared to substantiate. I'm familiar with Mr. Miller's record because I happened to look at it the other day. He's been cleared by the State Department. In my opinion, the duties which he's now carrying out, he's fit for. And I have done that after Mr. Rusk and I both looked at the matter, so therefore I cannot accept your description of him.
Did you both look at Mr. William Arthur Weiland, too?
I'm familiar with Mr. Weiland. I'm also familiar with his duties at the present time. And in my opinion, Mr. Miller and Mr. Weiland, the duties that they've been assigned to, they can carry out without detriment to the interests of the United States, and I hope without detriment to their characters by your question.
Mr. President, ever since you permitted the telecast of press conferences, a great deal of attention has been paid to little things that occur, especially in the home offices of newspapers. Would you save us a couple of hours' work tonight and explain what the Band-Aid is doing on your left hand?
Well, I cut my finger when I was cutting bread. Unbelievable as it may sound. Mr. Morgan?
According to unofficial estimates, the federal government has already spent more than $4 million on the enforcement of the desegregation orders at the University of Mississippi. To this point, do you consider that effort worth it? And would you consider it to be an effort that had failed if for some reason Mr. Meredith had to leave the university during this winter?
Well, it's not only $4 million, but it was, of course, 2 people were killed and a good many were wounded. And it was it's had wide repercussions, and some of them have been unfortunate. However, if the United States government had failed to exert its influence to protect Mr. Meredith, and Mr. Meredith had been denied admission by force, or if he had suffered the physical attack, that would have been far more expensive. And this country, of course, cannot survive if the United States government and the executive branch does not carry out the decisions of the court. It might be a decision in this case which some people may not agree with. The next time, it might be another matter, and this government would unravel very fast. So there's no question in my mind that the United States, the executive branch, had to take the action that it did. I'd be sorry if Mr. Meredith leaves. College is difficult enough under any conditions. He's been subjected to a good deal of harassment, and anyone who has been gone through his experience in college would find it difficult to continue. I hope he continues. If he doesn't, that's a loss not only to Mr. Meredith, but I think the University of Mississippi.
Mr. President, you have said that you are in favor of the 2-term limit to the office of the presidency. Now, how do you feel about former President Eisenhower's suggestion that the terms of congressmen also be limited?
It's the sort of proposal which I may advance in a post-presidential period, but not right now.
Mr. President, going back to the fall election, there's been considerable criticism of the candidacy of your brother Ted for senator from Massachusetts. Among your most vigorous supporters, it said that there are going to be too many Kennedys in Washington, and that Ted has not demonstrated a capacity for this. Would you comment and tell us what you think, whether you think this might be an issue in the fall?
Well, I don't know whether I would characterize as my most vigorous supporters, but I would say that there have been criticisms. But as Ted, my brother, pointed out, there are 9 members of our family. It's a big family. They're all interested in public life. So that in public life is centered in at least the great issues in the United States Capitol. Now, the people of Massachusetts are going to decide this. He had a very vigorously contested convention. He's going to have a primary in September. He'll have a very vigorous fight in November. And I would think the people of Massachusetts can make a judgment as to his qualifications and to whether there are too many Kennedys.
Mr. President, Martin Luther King has telegraphed you asking for federal action against anti-Negro terrorism in the South, and at least one Negro organization has threatened to picket you with the allegation that the federal government has not done enough. Could you tell us whether you have answered Dr. King and give us the thought that you gave him, and whether you can say that or not, can you give us a comment on the problem?
We're in contact with Dr. King and others who have communicated to us about it. I don't know any more outrageous action, which I've seen occur in this country for a good many months or years, than the burning of a church, 2 churches, because of the effort made by Negroes to be registered to vote. The United States Constitution provides for freedom to vote, and this country must permit every man and woman to exercise their franchise. To shoot, as we saw in the case of Mississippi, 2 young people who were involved in an effort to register people, to burn churches as a reprisal, with all of the provisions of the United States Constitution, at least the basic provision of the Constitution guaranteeing freedom of worship, I consider both cowardly as well as outrageous. The United States now has a number of FBI agents in there, and as soon as we are able to find out who did it, we'll arrest them. And we'll bring them before a jury, and I think that I'm sure they'll be appropriately dealt with. But let me say that nothing, I think, and I'm sure this is the view of the people of the states. The right to vote is very basic. If we're going to neglect that right, then all of our talk about freedom is hollow, and therefore we shall give every protection that we can to anybody seeking to vote. I hope everybody will register in this country. I hope they will vote. I commend those who are making the effort to register every citizen. They deserve the protection of the United States government, protection of the states, protection of local communities, and we shall do everything we possibly can to make sure that that protection is assured. And if it requires extra legislation and extra force, we shall do that.
President, do you think that Mrs. Murphy should have to take into her home a lodger whom she does not want, regardless of her reason, or would you accept a change in the Civil Rights Bill to accept small boarding houses like Mrs. Murphy?
The question would be, it seems to me, Miss Gregg, whether Mrs. Murphy had a substantial impact on interstate commerce.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I have one more.
Thank you, Mr. President. There seems to be a serious disagreement between you and Mayor Wagner of New York about the re-election of Congressman Buckley.
Mr. Smith was right, as usual. I'm for Congressman Buckley. He's for someone else. And that's the way it's going to be, I guess.
Mr. President, do you have any information or indication that communist bloc troops or new supplies of any kind have been landed in Cuba recently?
Yes, new supplies definitely in large quantities. Troops, we do not have information, but an increased number of technicians.
What is the significance of this, in your opinion?
Well, we're examining it now.
Do you think it's aimed at any other Central American country?
No, there's no evidence of that.
Senator Capehart of Indiana, in a speech the other day, said that the communists are sending troops into Cuba, not technicians, as you told us last week.
We have no evidence of troops.
Some of us were told at the State Department the other day that there is Russian military personnel in Cuba. That these are military technicians and other people who are probably going to operate missiles similar to the Nike missile. Is this in accord with...
Well, I don't know who told you that at the State Department. They're going to operate Nike missiles, because that information we do not have at this time. There certainly are technicians there. There may be military technicians. We don't have complete information about what's going on in Cuba, but in the sense that troops, the word troops are generally used, they've had military advisory mission there for a long period of time. So there may be additional military advisory personnel there or technicians. But in the question of troops, as it's generally understood, we do not have evidence that there are Russian troops there. There is an expanded advisory and technical mission. That's correct.
Are there no anti-aircraft missiles shipped into Cuba?
We have no information as yet. That doesn't mean that they haven't been, but all I'm saying is we have no such information as yet.
While he was president, JFK gave a live press conference on the average of one every 2 weeks. When the evidence did come in that there were Russian missiles in Cuba, he went 8 weeks without a conference. The press conferences after the Cuban Missile Crisis have a different feel about them than the ones before it. There's still the Kennedy humor, charm, and intellect, but it's as if the president had come of age during the nuclear showdown with the Russians. There's a fresh, eloquent confidence, a reassuring, persuasive urgency in Kennedy, a grace under pressure that made for some memorable moments in television and political history.
Afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to stress again how important it is that the United States Senate approve the pending nuclear test ban treaty. This treaty will enable all of us who inhabit the earth, our children and children's children, to breathe easier, free from the fear of nuclear test fallout. It will curb the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries, thereby holding out hope for a more peaceful and stable world. It will slow down the nuclear arms race without impairing the adequacy of this nation's arsenal or security. and it will offer a small but important foundation on which a world of law could be built.
President, it's been a long time since a president and his family have been subjected to such a heavy barrage of teasing and fun-poking and satire. I mean, there have been books on